Moro. I'm giving you a presentation here about mineral exploration that I held this presentation as well a few weeks back at the GTK and Tukes information meeting. Out of curiosity, when we talk about mineral exploration, we quite often talk about 1 in 1,000 on a global level. One out of 1,000 projects becomes a mine. It is a bit challenging, but what I've done here is we have compiled all the unique permits. I'm not saying a permit is equal to a project, but if that would be, so we compiled all the different permits, so removed all the extensions and just kept the unique permit. And over the last 10 years, we can say we have one mine in Sweden, a gold mine in Sweden, that has come up to operations. And we have the Keliber mine, a lithium mine in Western Finland. So what do you think? How many projects, how many unique permits have we had in Sweden? And how have we have in Finland over the last 10 years? The answer is that in Sweden we have had about 1,500 unique permits, and in Finland about 500 unique permits. And I think this is really important to keep in mind when we go through this presentation. There's some merit to this aspect. But, on a global level, the in between, 1 out of 1,000 makes sense also based on this comparison. Of course, there's so many ways to do this, but this is just one way I wanted to look into that. How successful are we, so to say. All right, this presentation will only be focusing on mineral exploration. It reflects, of course, my 20 years experience in Finland and Sweden when it comes to permitting and mineral exploration. And I have some personal commentary maybe to this. I cannot discuss, customer-specific or confidential information. And this comparison that was requested from Tukes is a comparison between Finland and Sweden on the permitting processes. It is presented as a comparison, not as advisory. And of course, over time, things change. So we cannot always compare 5 years back, 10 years back, 15 years back in comparison to now, and of course towards in the future, because things change. Legal, political, environmental, and so on. So the presentation I held was to give a goal. My goal was to highlight key differences and generate the discussion during the meeting. So the topic was mineral exploration permit process comparison between Finland and Sweden, and then the perceived weaknesses and strengths. And this was held on the 20th of May in 2026 in Rovaniemi. And my name is Matthias Fors. I'm a founder of Geopool. In the Nordics, there is something that is called NODD, NOD. Previously it was FODD, FOD. Nordic or Deposit Database. What I've done here is compiled. So top left, you see how many deposits, known deposits, that is known in the database, compiled by the GTK, SGU, and Norwegian Geological Survey. Out of these, about 46% is currently reserved. So a company has a permit on top of these. And in Sweden it is 55. And when I looked into Norway, it is actually even higher. So this tells me that exploration nowadays in Finland is more outside current or historical known deposit areas. We are moving more and more into new areas. Looking on it from the other side, we have about 950 permits valid, applied and valid in Finland, and out of these, about 81% is outside and doesn't have or include any NODD deposits. And in Sweden, there's about 1,100 permits, and out of these, 30% covers a known historical deposit, and 70% is then outside. Then we can also discuss what is a deposit. Is it an occurrence and so on? But it's basically it is a showing or a deposit that is highlighted in the NODD deposit database. This database is available. You can find it on the GTKeys website. Starting with reservation notification. This is unique for Finland. It doesn't exist in Sweden, nor does it exist in Norway. Our reservation notification has been really cheap. It has increased here a few years back, but you secure a big area. You can secure the ground, a larger area. It doesn't give you the exploration rights to conduct exploration there, but you get the once you have a reservation, no one else can apply for an exploration license within that area. So it secures the ground. That is the basic rule set up for this. It is valid for 1 to 2 years. And looking back over history, we can see that the reservation has quite often been the first step for many companies entering into Finland. And also for companies who have been in Finland, they have used the reservation system, applied for reservation, and after that compiled historical data and done evaluation of the area during this 1 to 2 years, and then decided if they walk away or proceed with an exploration license in part or whole of this reservation area. In June 2023, there was an increase in the cost. So now the cost is about €1 per hectare, and that has meant that, as you can see here, the red line, the reservation, the amount of square kilometers covered in total in Finland for a reservation has dropped significantly. The yellow bars is the exploration license valid permits in square kilometers. And as you can see, in Sweden there has been a strong increase since 2020. There has also been an increase in Finland, highlighted in blue, but as you can see, the number of square kilometers is much higher in Sweden than in Finland when looking at valid licenses. And of course, I understand, it changes during a year and so on, but this is by end of year status. I will come back in more detail to this as well. So starting with looking at the permit application stage. So this is from 2015 to 2025. And you can see that over the last couple of years, or since 2015 to 2023, we have had an increase in new mineral exploration permit applications in Finland. Since 2023, this has also dropped off. In Sweden, it has been more stable. We had a small peak in 2017 and also in 2023. But otherwise, it has been quite stable in Sweden. What difference is there between an area? Well, the first thing, both an exploration license in Sweden and exploration license in Finland secures the area, of course. When you're doing an application in Sweden, you don't need to cut out obstacles, and that is to be done in Finland. In Sweden, you submit corner coordinates, whereas in Finland there's a free-form polygon in shapefile. Looking more in detail into the application itself, in Sweden there's about 36 things to consider in the application, whereas in Finland it's 48. And yeah, many of these are of course the same, the applicant and so on. But I would also say that there's the mineral exploration permit in Finland, in addition to having 12 more things to be considered, the level of requirement is also higher in Finland. For example, in Sweden you can more generally describe the planned work that you're going to do, whereas in Finland you need a bit more detailed exploration plan, because it also affects the decision. What you put in the application in Finland also affects the decision. For example, if you only apply for soil sampling and ground geophysics in Finland, Tukes will only grant those two methods in Finland for you. But so if you want to do drilling, you also need to apply drilling, whereas in Sweden you can be more general. So moving over then to decision fees. So for an exploration license, and it is a bit tricky to compare these, but what I've done is taken 4 different sizes, and as you can see, the decision fee, so this is the decision fee in Finland taken by Tukes, and in Sweden what it's called undersökningsavgift, that I in English now then call decision fee. So for a 500 hectare area, you can see the prices in blue for Finland and in yellow for Sweden. And the larger the area is, the more the difference will be also between Finland and Sweden. And that's just the decision fees. The setup is a bit different between the countries, but yeah. Here's a map. What I find also quite interesting is that in Sweden we have about 290 municipalities, and in Finland about 308. Currently there is about 45% in Sweden out of the municipalities who doesn't have an exploration license. And in Finland it's even higher. It's about 70% of the municipalities that doesn't have an exploration permit. So it is a bit more concentrated in Finland to specific municipalities. Or you can turn it around. In Sweden, exploration is done on a broader area, depending on how you look at it. I would say that in Finland and Sweden there is some variations at the moment, and I will highlight this more on the next slide. But the reason why I want to highlight this about the municipalities is that I find it so important that when an exploration company is applying for an exploration license, it is really valuable to know, does the municipality, the landowners, the stakeholders, the authorities, do they have information about and knowledge about what is a mineral exploration permit? If you apply in an area where everyone knows, it is a one type of dialogue that needs to be happen with the municipality. But if you enter into a new area where there hasn't been any historical exploration during the last 5 years, the personnel and the landowners, everything has changed over these years, so you need to have a different type of approach. So this is quite an interesting map. What we've done here is compiled the valid permits, both mineral exploration and reservations in Finland, Sweden and Norway in March 2024, and then to the right April 2026. So the big difference is that you can see the increase in red for Norway, but also that in Norway exploration is happening all the way through the north, from the north to the south. Same thing with Sweden. You can see areas where exploration has been increasing over the last 2 years. But also here exploration happens from the north and almost all the way to the south. Whereas in Finland we have walked into the other direction. The number of exploration permits has decreased, as you saw also in the graph. But remember the first slide also. What number is the perfect area for an exploration company to have when it comes to permit and square kilometers? Does the company actually, despite having a lot of square kilometers, is it explorable? Do they have all the permits in place, or the other permits in place that is required in Sweden? Or do they have the finances to conduct exploration? So it's not always about the amount of square kilometers, but it's also how explorable the area is and how much effort the company can put into a permit. I'll come back to this a bit later as well. All right, so now we have a valid permit, and we look into the authorities side. In Sweden nowadays it takes about 72 days to get from you submit the application until you get a decision from Bergsstaten. Within Bergsstaten, this is from the SGU report, it takes about 13 hours per decision in practice. Whereas in Finland, the application decision takes about 6 to 9 months, and the decision itself takes about 20 hours, but considering all other aspects, the hearing process and so on, it's about 40 hours per decision. I will go through why this difference is this big in this presentation, and I also had other presentations where I highlighted this. Sorry, that went the wrong direction. So, when you have a valid permit in Finland and Sweden, there are first period in Sweden is 3 years, and then based on the results you apply for an extension for 3 years, and then for 4 years, and then at the ending of 5 years. And the requirements for approval increases over time. Same thing is in Finland, but the first year is then a 4 year. So first you have 4 years, and then you apply for another 3 years, but both countries have the 15 years. One big difference is that there is no landowner compensation in Sweden. So the first interaction basically that the company, if you only look from the legal point of view, having with the landowners is when you're contacting and you have a work plan. Of course, companies do different, and some companies might do it even before, of course. Whereas in Finland, there's a landowner compensation, and I have listed them there. So the 20 euros per hectare per year is for the first 4 years, and then for the first extension, the 3-year extension, it increases to 30 euros per hectare per year. And this is compensated then on your annual base to the landowner. So the difference between Finland and Sweden is here that when a company in Finland gets the exploration license, you need to reach out to the landowner to get the bank details so that this landowner compensation can be done. And this landowner compensation is paid regardless if exploration work is conducted or not. And there's some challenges, but there's also maybe some benefits in having this set up in Finland. So when you have a valid permit then, there's a security deposit in both countries. In Sweden, it is the company itself who proposes the size of the security deposit. There's some guidelines by Svemin, but it's the company itself who proposes them, and Bergsstaten then approves or requires a higher security deposit, and it's paid to the Bergsstaten itself. So the Bergsstaten holds this money for you. Whereas in Finland, the company is obligated to put it as a deposit on a bank account, and this is also defined in the size of the security is defined in law. In Sweden, there's not much reporting requirements. It's basically at the end of the permit. So when the company decides to walk away and not extend this permit anymore, or if they decide to withdraw the valid permit, then there's a reporting requirement coming in. In Finland, the reporting is in 2 stages. One is in the beginning of the year. You are to report how much expenditures you have invested in the exploration areas the company has. And then at June, more or less, the company is also obligated to provide all the data from the previous year's exploration activities. For both of these, both in Finland and Sweden, the material you provide goes into the mining authorities. It is in quarantine for some time, and then after it is being released then to GTK and it becomes public available. Or on the Swedish side, Bergsstaten releases the information to SGU and it becomes public available information. In Sweden, there is, when you have a valid permit, there is no information meeting requirements, whereas in Finland it is required that the permit holder informs the landowners at least once a year in what we call normally an open door event. It can also happen in the other ways, but basically an open door event kind of arrangement. So looking more in detail. So on this graph, you have as the dotted lines in yellow, you have the number of permit holders. No, sorry, the number of permits. And in blue dotted line, the permit numbers, or the amount of numbers as the dotted line. And as you can see, since 2020, basically both Sweden and Finland has increased. But then if we look at the bars, in yellow is the square kilometer for Sweden, and in blue, Finland. So as you can see, there's almost 7 times more permits, square kilometers coverage in Sweden than in Finland. And more or less the double when it comes to permit numbers, from 400 to approximately 800. An average size of a permit in Finland is about 800 hectares, and in Sweden it's about 2,800 hectares. Currently, the largest permit in Finland is almost 10,000 hectares, whereas in Sweden it's almost 7 times more, 70,000 hectares almost. So if we take the average size of the permits currently in Finland and Sweden, we end up at about 1,800 hectares. And what I've done then is compile the cost here. So if we take exploration license, 1,800 hectares, and it's valid for 15 years, including we also had the reservation period here. You can see the reservation doesn't exist in Sweden, so it's 0, but the reservation cost would be 1,800 euros. For the first initial period, the first period, so which in Sweden it's 3 years and in Finland it's 4 years, the cost would be in Sweden about 3,000 euros and 144,000 euros in Finland. And then for the first extension, it's about 11,000 euros in Sweden and 162,000 euros in Finland, and so on. So summing this up, in Sweden, having a permit that is 1,800 hectares for about 15 years will cost you about 67,000 euros, whereas in Finland it's about 800,000. So it's more or less 12 times more expensive currently to hold a permit in Finland than in Sweden. Another way to look at different datasets is that if we take the investments during the last 10 years and compare it with different datasets. So if we take the number of permits and the investments that has been made into each country, you can see how the investments has increased per permit in Sweden over the last 10 years. If we look at the investments and split them by the total number of square kilometers, you can see also that in Sweden there's been a small increase by the euros invested per square kilometer of all the permits, whereas in Finland actually the investments per square kilometer has decreased. And then if we look at the number of permit holders, you can see that the investments has increased a lot in Sweden, whereas in Finland it has over the last 8 years or so more or less been on the same. I know there's a big difference between Finland and Sweden, the number of companies, the number of majors, juniors and so on. And this of course has to be taken into account. What is also important to highlight on this slide is that Sweden and Finland reports the numbers in a different way. So you should not compare here Sweden and Finland on the amount level, but just look at the trends for each country, because the reporting system is different between the countries. All right, so you get a valid permit, and what happens then? Here I compiled a graph, and during 25 there was about 227 decisions in Sweden, and 27% were appealed. In Finland, we had 158 decisions made by Tukes, and about 12% was appealed. Why is this? Well, there's so many different aspects. What is Natura? What is extension? Who's the applicant? What is put in the work plan? As I mentioned, in Finland, you need to include the work plan in the application, which is also part of the decision, whereas in Sweden, this is not the same thing. So you cannot compare them in that way, but I think this trend is also quite interesting, that you can see from 2016 onwards here how many appeals there has been over the years. Sorry about that. And here we go. So the permit is of course one thing. Is it explorable? And then we end up what I call the work plans, or what we within the industry call the work plan. So as I mentioned, in Sweden it is the Bergsstaten who is the mining authority, and they give you grant for the exploration license. But an exploration license secures the area, but it doesn't become explorable. To become explorable, to conduct exploration work, you need to have a work plan. And in Sweden, this work plan is then approved by the county and the landowners. And basically, the mining authority, Bergsstaten, doesn't have anything to do with it, unless you have to put the work plan into force, because you cannot agree with the landowners or the county. This process requires a letter with receipt. So you send out a letter, and you need to have a signature from the landowner that they have received the work plan, and then they have three weeks to get back to you if they have any aspects they want the exploration company to take into account during for the work plan. It is at this stage where the obstacles shall be defined at the latest. So the permit holder needs to take into account different obstacles, ancient remains, nature, environment, groundwater, etc. in the work plan stage. It is estate dependent in Sweden, so one estate approves and then you can start for that area, but you need to wait until the 3 weeks has passed for the other estate before you can conduct exploration work on the other estate. So it is a puzzle to get that work. In Finland, the mining authority Tukes grants the whole exploration package basically, and I know that there's differences than if you're in protected areas and so on, but using a normal without any bigger nature protected areas, Natura 2000 or similar. If you have that, basically when you have when you have a valid exploration permit, you have paid the landowner compensations, the requirement is to have a letter of notification towards the landowners when you're about to start the exploration work, and there's some information required in the letter of notification to the landowners, but you don't need the landowners' written approval for it, because the work plan is included in the permit approval. What this means is that in Finland, when you apply for work, you actually need to compile all the restrictions, all the obstacles, all the information you possibly can already at the application stage, which I see is a benefit, because you can then also cut out or change the area of interest that you apply for. A work plan quite often covers the whole area that you want to explore, not maybe the whole exploration permit area, but the whole area at once becomes valid in a way. And it's then for the whole period that you put in it for. So a summary is that permit costs are in Sweden much lower than in Finland, and higher than of course in Finland and in Sweden. The landowner doesn't get any of the compensation, whereas in Finland landowners get more or less 90% of the fees. In 2025 it was 9.5 million euros that was paid to the landowners as compensation for the permits. Compensation for damages is the same in both countries. So if you cut down a tree and so on, in both countries you compensate them for that. In Sweden, normally then a company apply for an area, and because you want to secure the area, which is fine, but it's after that maybe that the possible obstacles and restrictions in that information is being compiled. Whereas in Finland, all the obstacles and restrictions and that information needs to be applied and cut out maybe from the permit that you're applying for. What this means in practice is that what I see is that in Sweden it's trickier to schedule work. If someone comes to Geopool and says, we want to conduct drilling and so on, let's say 1st of July or 1st of August, it is a process to get to that, which is much different. We need to have the approvals from the landowners. Landowners might be on holiday, they might be sick, who owns the estate and so on. Whereas in Finland, this work has already been compiled in the application stage for the permit itself. So it is actually easier then to plan, conduct, notify the landowner when the work is to be planned. So summarizing this is that in Sweden it is a bit like post-permit decision. So it is easy to submit an area of application, and it's after that the post-permit that you start to compile the information. Whereas in Finland it is a pre-permit decision, so you compile all the information before you submit the application. Visualizing also the difference here is that in Sweden then, if this dark area is the exploration license, it is first Bergsstaten who approves the exploration license for the whole area. And later, when you want to conduct exploration work, for example in this yellow area, you need to be in contact with and have approvals from the county and the landowners. And to the right, you have the whole area, and basically it's being processed at once by TUKE, ELY and LVV. So you apply for the whole area, and the authorities need then to take to account exploration activities within the whole area. So there's a difference between these two setups. So for those who knows the Finnish way, I would say think of Sweden as a reservation, but then you have estate-based approval work plan structure on top of that to conduct exploration work. For Swedes, how to summarize the Finnish way? Well, it is. I haven't formalized a sentence. It is totally different. Looking then on the history, I found this quite interesting. There's a global investment within exploration in red, and you can also see the trends since 2015 to 2025, how much has been invested within mineral exploration over the last 10 years. So the question is now, how will it look into the future? The upcoming 10 years, where will we go? Will Sweden continue increase like this? Is there available ground in Sweden in the future? If we look at the maps in Finland and Sweden now, for sure there is opportunities in Finland with available land areas that might then become a discovery in 10-15 years, and maybe even a mine in 15-20 years. So you can look at the situation in Finland as challenging. Yes, it is, but there's also, with an opportunistic kind of view, you can look at new areas in a different way that are not pegged at the moment. I also want to highlight the Löytämisen taustalla. This is a Finnish podcast in Finnish, and we are discussing mineral exploration, and we are trying to focus for it towards landowners, stakeholders and authorities, and of course anyone who is interested, to talk about what is mineral exploration, what is the differences between mineral exploration. There's also a Swedish/English version that you can find under the name Beyond Discovering. So with that, I want to say thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and reach out if you have any questions. And take care. Moi moi.